Good evening. Thank you for coming.
Hello.
I'm delighted to today speak to Mikhail Zygar about his new book. I have to look what it's called in English. Well, War and Punishment. The story of Russian oppression and Ukrainian resistance, in German Krieg und Sühne, der lange Kampf der Ukraine gegen die russische Unterdrückung, gerade frisch auf Deutsch erschienen. First, I would like to introduce Mikhail Zygar. He is a very well-known journalist, a Russian journalist who has done a very important work in the Russian media when this was still, it was always difficult, but when this was at least still possible. He reported on wars not only in Russia but globally, but he was also a very, very well-known journalist about Russian politics within Russia, the kind of Putin and his entourage, how this system works, who is connected to whom, and he was also a founder of the independent radio channel Doschd.
TV channel.
Sorry?
TV channel.
Oh, sorry, TV channel. TV channel Doschd, which was also one of the few media channels which could report, well, which did report, always under pressure, critically on Russian politics, and which had to leave Russia after the full-scale invasion in February 2022. And that was also the point when Mikhail Zygar decided that he would leave Russia, and he's now based in Berlin, if I'm correctly informed. I'm not going to say much about me, but because I'm not the main focus here. My name is Franziska Davies. I'm a historian of Eastern Europe at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, and I'm very excited to now speak to Mikhail about his book. But I would also like to speak about his first book, which came out, I think it was 2016, the English version. I think the German version came out a little later.
Earlier.
Really
German
earlier.
version was in 2016. German version.
Then
and
the German. Okay, then
17
the
English.
German. Then first, I read the English version first. I didn't know that it first came out in German. Anyway, but actually, this is I can make a point from this mistake, because I was a bit disappointed that it wasn't really noticed as much as I would like to have been noticed in the German media. It was called Endspiel: Die Metamorphosen des Wladimir Putin, and this was already the time when in German we sadly in Germany had coined the term Russlandversteher. People who understand Russia, and the exciting thing about these Russlandversteher was that they were not really people who understood Russia. They were people who defended Putin and his regime. And I always thought it would have been so much better if more people would have read Mikhail's book, because this was really a very knowledgeable book about Putin and the inner workings of his circle, and how this very kind of. I was also actually really impressed when I read it how much you knew. I didn't, and how you knew it. I mean, I understand you have to protect your sources, but I was actually very, very impressed how much you obviously knew to have this kind of thick description of the inner workings of Putin and Putin's circle. So I was very excited, and I'll come to my first question soon, I'm sorry, to learn that you'd written a new book. But I also thought, in a way, it's very different from your first book. I've been thinking about that, and by now I've already realized some similarities. But I think one of the main differences I thought I noticed was your first book was very kind of analytical, and I'm not saying this is not analytical, don't get me wrong, but it was. I had much more the idea of this view of a critical journalist who was trying to very kind of objectively write about what was going on in Russia. And this starts off with saying, I have responsibility for this war in Ukraine, against Ukraine, this Russian war against Ukraine. I was blind, and I have to, as a Russian, I have to speak about how my country has turned into a fascist country. And I have to speak about how this could happen and what the history is behind this. So also kind of a personal take, I would say, on Russia's history toward Ukraine. And also I've just come from a demonstration in front of the State Opera in Berlin today, because Anna Netrebko will be performing there, who in the past supported Putin's regime and who never really distanced herself from it. And one of the people who gave a speech there said there are too few Russians who basically do what you do, say, I have to address this as a Russian citizen. So maybe this very long introduction, what was your motivation for writing this book?
Thank you for your introduction, and thank you for coming. First of all, I'm really sorry that we have to speak English, not German. My German is not that good, so I could answer all the questions. And I hope that next book is going to be accompanied my fluent German. Thank you for your question, and yeah, it's right. My previous book that was called All the Kremlin's Men in all the languages except for German, in Russian, English, in Finnish, Slovak, Hungarian, was a book about contemporary Russian history, and I was writing it while I was working the editor-in-chief of Doschd. I was writing it as a independent journalist who was in Russia at that time, and it was a book about the history that was not over yet. I was writing some kind of results of Putin's presidency before the end of Putin's presidency. It was written, I realized that time, actually I was collecting material for that book about the history of Putin's transformation, about the transformation of his inner circle for 7 years before I published the book. But it was crystal clear for me that time that I had to write that book after Crimea occupation, because that was very clear border when it has become obvious for all of us that we have crossed the line. Everything has changed, and it was obvious that a tremendous U-turn has been made by President Putin, by Russia, and it was already the end of some kind of era, and it was enough for me to have like an arc of that diabolic character and to write the book. But actually history was not over. This book is obviously personal history, a personal story, and it's not only about Russian politics, it's also about me. And I'm not sometimes, although I hate writing about myself, and I think that actually that's a bad taste for the journalist to insert some private details, but the reason for me to write that book was the fact that I felt that it's my moral obligation. It's I have to do that. That's my burden, and I have to start that conversation that has never been started in Russia and actually outside of Russia as well. I felt that that's a book about me. There are a lot of my attempts to reanalyze Russian history, not only what's happening right now, but Russian history during the last 3 centuries. I bear responsibility not only for what's happening, but for everything in this book, and I'm writing it, everything I write is based on my own reporting from Ukraine. As a journalist, I've been working in Ukraine since 2003. That was the first time I was I started writing, but I went as a reporter to Ukraine, and that was very funny. I was working for the biggest Russian newspaper, Kommersant, that time, that time it was well-known and independent and very high-quality Russian newspaper. And I was a war correspondent, actually. I was in charge of Iraq, Middle East, Lebanon, Sudan, Kosovo. But before the new year, the top correspondent who was in charge of traveling with President Putin, he decided to start his New Year vacations a week earlier. So the moment when the huge crisis between Russia and Ukraine started, and there were urgent negotiations, the huge crisis because of Crimea, actually. The first crisis because of Crimea happened in 2003. And there were urgent negotiations of Presidents Putin and Kuchma, and there was no reporter to travel with Putin for those negotiations, and it was very weird that I was sent as a Kremlin correspondent, although I have never seen Putin before. I've seen Saddam Hussein only. So that was my first experience. Then I worked at all Ukrainian revolutions. I was covering Orange Revolution. I was covering all the protests after that. I happened to be lucky to interview all Ukrainian presidents. From President Kravchuk till President Zelensky. So this book is extensively based on my own impressions and on a lot of things I have seen, I have heard from not only my sources, but from the people on the streets. And yes, it was very important for me to write it in the most personal way, just to explain that I cannot help writing this book. And you know, the name of this book is comprised of names of two. It's a joke, but it's a sad joke. It's a combination of War and Peace and Crime and Punishment. And you know, there is a very famous phrase of Leo Tolstoy. When he addressed to other authors, he said, "You should write only when you cannot when you cannot refrain from writing. If you can refrain from writing, please don't write." So that was my case. That was the moment when I understood that there is no other chance for me not to write this book. Although I started writing it in 2021, before the war, that was completely different story in my mind, but I traveled to Kiev, to other regions of Ukraine many times. I interviewed, I met President Zelensky the first time in September 2021. And for me, it was clear that I need to read the book about Ukraine as a phenomena, as the only post-Soviet country that has become really post-Soviet, that got through, that managed to get rid of its Soviet background and like Soviet curse, that stopped considering itself to be a colony. But when the war started, I realized that my book was going to be completely different. That I think that it changed, like the book changed me a lot, because I realized that I have to deal with not only with Putin or with Ukraine, with the war. I have to deal with such a tragedy as Russian history. I have to start my war against Russian history that is unfortunately a fraud, that has always been a propaganda. That unfortunately I suddenly realized that all Russian historians, and after that all Western historians, because they were taught by the same historical narrative. All Russian historians have always been propagandists. They were like Karamzin, the father of Russian history, was the official court historiographer of Alexander I. Tatishev, his predecessor, was working for the state. All founding fathers of Russian historiography were not professors. They were state servants. They reported directly to the head of government, to the head of state, to the emperor. And actually, every time Russian regime was changing, the head of state himself, like Stalin did it. Stalin edited a brief course of the history of Communist Party himself. And academician Grekov, who wrote his book about Kiev and Rus, had corrections from Stalin. So it's a very and it's not an occasional thing. It's unfortunately the mythological version of Russian imperial history is our curse, and that's the lens, and we have been watching towards our past, and we know our country only through those lens of Russian imperial historical narrative, and that was probably my mission. Try to find out when all those myths were created, who created all those historical myths we believe in. As a child, I was born in Soviet Union, and in Soviet school, then in Russian school, I was taught actually. The education in Russian school was very different from the education in Soviet schools, so I know both variants, but still we are all based on very imperialist approach to Russian history. And unfortunately, the Western, even the American school of Russian studies is also based on the same tradition, because the Western school of Russian studies was greatly influenced by the white immigration after Great Russian Revolution, and all those white immigrants were strong believers in the mythological, imaginary Great Russia, and they believed in superiority of Great Russian culture and Great Russian Empire, even more than President Putin does. So yes, I had a very ambitious mission when I decided to write this book. And actually, if I should put it mildly, the idea was the minimal idea was just to start the conversation. I hope that we are in the beginning of our journey, and I'm ready for huge criticism and for the outburst of criticism from the Russians, as well as from other audience. But I think that this conversation is strongly needed.
Yeah, I think this is basically the conversation about decolonizing Russia, which has now become a bit of a catch phrase, but which is basically, I think, what your book is also about, to counter the narrative of the imperial narrative of the Russian Empire and then the Soviet Union with a counter narrative. And I have to admit that as like a historian, it was also challenging for me, because you really offer, let me say, very, I don't want to say. So now I don't know at all what I wanted to say, but
don't be shy.
a very kind of very clear-cut counter. I mean, in a way, you could say this is the counter-narrative to Putin's essay in summer 2021.
No. I haven't even started.
So it's gonna get even.
No. That's just like It's a warm-up.
Okay, well, no, but I mean, I absolutely agree that that this conversation needs to be done, and I also agree that this Russian imperial narrative also influenced Western academia because basically imperial or knowledge is created in imperial centers. So historical knowledge was for a long time created more in Moscow than in Kiev. That's where the kind of prestigious institutions were in the Russian Empire and later the Soviet Union. And
May I interrupt you?
No, well, you've talked a lot, but okay, go ahead. No, okay.
You know, your first question was also long.
Okay, no, go ahead.
No, finish.
Okay, no, so, okay. now I'm confused. So this is, so in a way, I think this is kind of a counter-narrative starting from the 17th century going back to the present, and I mean, the idea is already in the title, the struggle between Russian imperialism and Ukrainian resistance. And of course, this is also from the perspective of the historian who's also interested in nuances and ambivalences. This is not an ambivalent book. This is a very kind of clear-cut story, and I guess in a way that's in its own right productive, because as you say, it's also a first step to start the conversation outside of like academic circles, and I think you need a kind of counter narrative to get the conversation started. But it's a very interesting genre, and I would be interested because it's 300 years of history, but it's also very much about people, individuals, mostly men, in this kind of Ukrainian-Russian struggle. So what kind of genre would you say is this book?
You know, I remember that a friend of mine, Dmitry Muratov, has written, I will quote, "Zygar has invented a new genre. If Tolstoy's story is a white river and Proust's is a slow river, Zygar's is a chase." So Murat thinks that that's a chase. You know, I think that's no different from any other book I've written before. For example, I've got a book that was called "The Empire Must Die," and unfortunately, it has never been translated to German. But it was translated to English and some other languages, and that was a story about the collapse of Russian Empire, and that was the story of how Russian Empire was doomed or occasionally collapsed in 1917. And that was also a very thorough story of the people. I always pay attention to the human stories and to the choices people make. Because for me, history is not about a political process. It's not about some factors. It's about names and surnames and their mistakes and their decisions. And I think that's probably rare approach. But at the same time, you know, that's the way how in 21st century, I suppose, history could and should be written, because that's a history of personalities. That's history of ordinary people changing the world, and we see that. That like Russia was not doomed to, it was not predetermined to become a great empire, or Ukraine was not, Soviet Union was not doomed to collapse. It was a huge, very complex jigsaw of decisions made by different people, and I want to, and I'm trying to find all those people to to get together all those pieces of that jigsaw and explain that sometimes history is not run by logic, but very often run by stupidity and by mistakes people make. Not only men, but also women, unfortunately. Catherine the Great is one of the...
I prefer to call her Catherine II.
You know, actually in Russian, she is always called Catherine II, but unfortunately, as Peter the First is the Russian version, but unfortunately, English tradition is about greatness.
Well, let's break the tradition.
Yeah. She's Katarina II, as it's
Catherine II, the so-called Great.
Or we can call her Sofia Federica Augusta.
Yeah, fine with me.
Yeah. Actually, and I wanted to mention the fact that I guess that this book might be very, and should be, very provocative for German audience, because it shows that a lot of Germans contributed in a bad way to create that Russian imperial mythology. Actually, the book starts with a person named Innocenty Giesel, who was born in Königsberg and who was German, but he in 17th century he moved to Kiev. He was baptized and he was Orthodox, and he has become the abbot of Kiev-Pechersk monastery. And he was the person who, for the first time, wrote that myth about unity of Russian and Ukrainian people, and that was part of his political game. And he was very successful. He persuaded Moscow Tsar Alexis that was very probable concept, because before that all the concepts of Russian history were really fantastic. Before that, Ivan the Terrible believed that he is descendant of prophets from Bible, and then Roman emperors, and so his picture of his family was very fantastic. So that concept created by Innocenty Giesel was who proved that Russians and Ukrainians are the same people. There is some abstract virtual Rus, and first its capital was in Kiev, and then it somehow was transmitted to Moscow. And actually, he was, in a way, to blame for the fact that all Russian official historians took his concept and were inspired by his concept and actually duplicated it again and again. Then we have Gerhard Müller as another historian who was official historian of Empress Elizabeth. And then we have Catherine II, who actually played one of the terrible roles in history of Ukrainian people. And if we read Taras Shevchenko, we may see that he hates Catherine II and as well as Peter I, as the most terrible murderers of Ukrainian people.
Yeah, and now we have Gerhard Schröder, so this tradition unfortunately continues. Yeah, and I mean the title is actually a nice way of transmitting this idea, because you as you say, it's a mixture of Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and of course in German, in the German so-called Russland complex, the Russia complex we have, because we haven't really addressed the kind of joint German-Russian imperialism at the cost of the people in between Russia and Germany. It actually is kind of a challenging for that by saying, well, this kind of great Russian culture has also a lot to do with imperial culture. This next question is perhaps not very nice, not very fair. I also get it a lot. Yeah, question about the future, which of course none of us know. but you said you wanted...
We have just started. Why? Why should we end right now?
Well, we also want to have a Q&A, but we won't run out of topics to talk about. You said you would like to start this conversation also in Russia about decolonizing Russian history, decolonizing Russian society, looking critically at Russian imperial myths, which have been a tradition of Russian states and societies. How do you think this conversation, where can it take place, how can it take place? Can it only take place once Ukrainians have won? What is your take on that?
I think that's a very long way. I think it's going to take decades to start this conversation, to try to embrace those ideas that probably Russians don't need to call everything they touch as great. We don't need to call Russian language great Russian language. It's still okay not to call it great. It's still okay to call Russian literature not great Russian literature, like great Russian culture. We need to get rid of. Fortunately, the idea of Russian spirituality is so compromised by Putin, and every time Putin says that Russia is an island of stability, and only in Russia we have traditional spiritual values, and Europe is in total moral decay, and it's run by gays and refugees. So he is destroying the good faith in that it could be serious. So I think he is discrediting the idea, and especially like the war against Ukraine is. I think that's the most important blow to Russian imperialism, because it's totally discredited, and we see that the idea of Russian greatness can lead to the atrocities in Bucha. And there is very clear connection, and but I think it's going to be needed to like, I don't know how many years, but I think that it's not after the war. It should be probably parallel process. You know, when I lived in Russia, I thought that I was 100% sure that majority of Russians do not buy all that jingoist rhetorics. They are not. They don't believe in all that bullshit that Russian propaganda TV channels spread. They pretend to accept it, just not to meddle with it. But I was sure that they don't like it. I still have that suspicion, although it's hard to prove it right now. But I'm afraid that obviously the huge jingoist propaganda that like the current wave of that propaganda obviously started after huge protests in Russia of 2012. Because that was the moment when Putin realized that he couldn't be sure that he's going to rule the country till the end of his life. He saw that the most educated people, that Russian middle class was uprising against him, and they were not thankful for him for the great decade, very successful first decade of his presidency, and he felt that he cannot rely on those people, on the educated, successful people. He needs another core audience. He needs those people who want Russia great again. They are less sophisticated, less educated, and it's easier to sell them that idea of Russian greatness. And these people were obviously happy with Crimea annexation, and that was a very clear mechanism how to keep the whole country loyal and how to remain in power. That was like just one button, and all the internal political problems vanish. And I think that the 10 years of that propaganda, they matter. Unfortunately, they have changed the face of Russia. We had, after 2012, we had 10 years of militarist movies on TV screens and in the cinema. We had all sorts of militarist propaganda on a daily basis. I remember that I noticed many years ago that somehow there were a lot of murals in Moscow and like posters and a lot of random pictures everywhere glorifying the great soldiers of different centuries, of 17th century, of 19th century. So for 10 years, Moscow was covered with some heroic pictures without any clear logic. But now the logic is clear for me. The country was ideologically militarizing, and that constant brainwashing was happening during one decade. But now we see that that's a long time. So obviously, probably the cure, the treatment and the cure are going to be very long. So it should be started right now. I'm not sure that the moment when Putin is gone. And I think that for me that will happen simultaneously. The war will end the moment when Putin is gone. But I don't think that moment is the final moment for the troubles of Russia, because the brainwashed people are still there, and the people who believe that it's possible to sacrifice other nations' lives for the sake of Russian greatness, they exist. Yeah, unfortunately, they are not the majority, but they exist, and probably it's needed to try to do something. Probably it's needed to educate younger generations, but it's going to be a very long journey, I guess.
Yeah, I was struck by your answer, because I think the point of your book is actually also to point out that this is not just kind of the elite brainwashing the people, but this kind of imperial identity is also ingrained in Russian elites. What you said right now, I also agree that, the kind of anti-Ukrainian propaganda since 2013, since Maidan, and this militarizing aggressive culture you mentioned, that is really important. But I also think we now see that this kind of, especially when it comes to Ukraine, I think this is this talk that Russian liberalism ends in Ukraine. Because even the people who are against the Soviet regime, who are against Stalin, not all of them obviously, but like the famous examples of Alexander Solzhenitsyn or Josef Brodsky, who were both against the Soviet regime, who were anti-totalitarian, they still had this idea of a Russian imperial culture, and they disregarded claims of Ukrainian independence. But this is more like a comment. I should come to the question. But feel free to respond. Feel free.
First, Solzhenitsyn and Brodsky should not be compared. They are very different. Solzhenitsyn is Russian imperialist. Brodsky is not.
But have you read his poem about Ukraine, 1991? Well, you have, obviously, yes.
Got a chapter about it. But that, for him, that was a hooliganism. That was not his idea. He didn't give a shit about politics. Yeah, but yes, it was a disgusting poem. I explained why he wrote it, but actually he was not. His mindset was not imperialistic. But Solzhenitsyn is a forefather of Putinism, and that's clear. But I'm happy that you quoted Pavel Milyukov, who used to be the leader of Russian liberals in the beginning of 20th century, and he was foreign minister of Russian provisional government, and that's his phrase, that Russian liberalism ends in Ukraine. And it shows how Russia has changed and how Russian liberalism has changed. Because Pavel Milyukov, who thought that Ukraine was an integral part of Mother Russia, at the same time thought that Constantinople should be the capital of Russia. He thought that Russia should win the First World War and should conquer Constantinople, and that's inevitable. And he was not considered to be conservative, traditionalist, nationalist. He was the liberal, the most liberal politician in Russia in 20th century. So we've come a long way. Current Russian liberals don't want to conquer Turkey.
Well, okay, yeah.
And
Pretty low standards.
There is consensus that among at least Russian liberals that Ukraine should win this war, that Russia, that current Russian state should be defeated, and that Ukraine is an independent state. So it's after only 1 century has passed, and we are slightly different. So time changes us.
Yeah, I don't want to dwell too much on this point. Just as a footnote, I disagree on Brodsky, and I was also quite shocked in 2014 how many, at least in my personal acquaintance and also in some opposition circles, the annexion of Crimea was not clearly seen as a act of aggression, or an act of injustice. It was maybe seen as an act of aggression.
I didn't say that Brodsky's poem was good. I just want to stress that he is very different in his mindset to Solzhenitsyn. They are different.
We can talk about it afterwards over a beer, because now you have the opportunity to ask Mikhail some.
You wanted to ask your last question before that.
I'm afraid I don't have the time. So only if you don't have any questions, but I'm sure that is not the case. So now the floor is open for your questions, and I'm sure there's a microphone in the room. We have a question right here in the first row, and then at the gentleman in the back with his glasses and a lovely white and blue shirt.
First of all, thanks very much. I think it was quite interesting. I just have one question. We already turned towards kind of the future, what you're trying to achieve with that book. And you said that you're trying to provide a counter-narrative. My question was that by providing that counter-narrative, if you want to also achieve kind of political change in Russia, not only like changing the debate on Russian history, but also achieving a political change in kind of the long term. And if you even think that that's even a feasible option, achieving any political change in current Russia, because I think what we've seen is that any real opposition right now coming in Russia is like coming from the right, with Prigozhin, with all liberal opposition either outside of Russia or imprisoned. So is there any real option for political change in Russia, and do you want to achieve that by providing that counter-narrative? Yeah.
Thank you. I think that political change is, I believe in values, and I think that political change depends on values, and it's really necessary for Russian people to be less cynical than they are now, and I think it's necessary to start believing in something, because that's the curse of current generations, of post-Soviet generations of Russians, because they do not believe in democracy, in elections, in free press, in anything, because that's what propaganda says, actually, that democracy does not exist, and that's what they know from their childhood, because like the generations of the people who were like me, like my age, who were very young when Soviet Union collapsed, but they still were taught that Lenin is our great leader, and the next day they came to school and the teacher said, okay, forget it. Everything we have told is a lie. Just never mind. That's bullshit. That means that a lot of Russians are very cynical, and that's the only way to survive, they think. I think that's, to solve that problem is very important, because without believing in values, it's very hard to build institutions and to make real political change. And I think that it's possible because it's not a unique situation. As other Russia, as other empires have to follow the same path. British Empire also had a lot of very, I won't compare Russia to Germany, I will compare it to British Empire. It had very tragic history as well, a lot of crimes against its former colonies, but actually the process of reconsideration of British bloody colonial history has started. And actually it started in the beginning of 20th century. In the beginning of 20th century, Kipling, our beloved author of Jungle Book, was considered to be a very indecent colonial poet in Britain, because he was known for his infamous poem about white man's burden, like the symbol of racist poetry. So that process started, and it's, as we see on a British example, it's a very long process. British people are trying to fight against their inner empire. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. As we see, Brexit is the example that even after 100 years of that fight against your imperial psychology, sometimes you cannot overcome it. But that's a very long process, and I think that Russian people should start that process. I know that a lot of politicians would agree with me. Unfortunately, the most prominent Russian politician, named Alexei Navalny, is in prison. That doesn't mean, that he's not a Russian politician, and that he's not the most important competitor of Vladimir Putin. And I hope that there is a possibility that one day Alexei Navalny is going to be out of prison, and but you know, for any kind of election where Alexei Navalny or other politicians, or Ilya Yashin, or I don't know, Garry Kasparov, for anyone to run for an office, there should be the political process, there should be atmosphere, there should be people who would believe in something. So I think we need that political change, but I'm afraid that the cultural change, the moral change should be the first.
So we have, okay, this is going to be challenging, but we have the first question from this gentleman, and then the woman, the lady in the on the left, the black glasses and black shirt, and then we'll try to keep your answers short, and yes, if we do, then we have two more questions. I've taken mental notes of you two. Okay, so you first.
Thank you. I'll try and keep the question short then. So this book, as I understand it, is part of your desire to start that conversation within Russia. And I understand that it must be very difficult to find a publisher in Moscow for a book like this. But I was curious to find that this book doesn't appear to have been published in Russian. And I was just wondering whether you wrote it in English or Russian.
In Russian, yeah, it will be published in Russian.
Okay, but the English one was released first, right?
Yeah, English version and German are the first, but I hope that Russian will follow. I know, yeah, it will be published in Europe, outside of Russia. I hope that it will be distributed digitally inside Russia.
Okay.
So I just tried to pin you down with a simple question. You started talking about Navalny, and I was interested in your personal opinion, whether Navalny, in your opinion, was the man for the alternative in Russia, and what was his party, the party of the future, I think, was Navalny's party called. What was basically its main manifesto? Was it looking towards a federal idea, like an equivalent of Europe, or was it going to sort of get rid completely of the idea of empire? Was it, what was it, in your opinion? I'd be interested to hear.
His manifesto, or you are asking about his political views?
No, I'm asking whether you think that Navalny was the person, the man, the politician who would have provided the alternative.
Yes, I think that he is. He has written a lot of texts during the last year that express his point of view. He's very anti-imperialistic politician. He is the person who believes in values, and I think that's very important. I've recently written a column for Der Spiegel about that, and actually I'm writing a weekly column for Der Spiegel. If you don't read it, I invite you to read it. Navalny is, I think that's a great example of a person who is in the most desperate situation, who is in prison without any future possibility to leave it, but still he in most of his texts he proves that he wants Russia to become a real democracy. He believes in institutions. He believes in values. He speaks out his mind, and he is very principled in that way. And I think I know him personally very well, and I personally believe him. But as a politician, I think he's doing a great job showing a moral example to other Russian politicians who are free outside of Russia.
I disagree on Navalny, but I don't. Some things you said about Navalny, but I'm afraid we don't have the time because there are still two.
If you want to criticize him for his words about Crimea in 2014, I can tell you that actually people can change.
No, I
20 years ago, in my book, I write a lot about that. Vladimir Zelensky was a stand-up comedian, and his jokes were about Ukrainians were so insulting. So he might have been outraged by his own jokes right now. But
yes,
he has changed.
Perhaps
circumstances change people a lot.
I believe that people can change, maybe not as often as they should. But I have a colleague from Kazakhstan, and she will not trust Navalny, and I can completely understand that until he has not explicitly distanced himself from his racist remarks of the past. And I think this is also something that we should keep in mind. But I don't want to start a whole new discussion on that because we still have two questions. And if that's okay, there was a second woman. Yes. So first you, and then this the woman in I think also black. Maybe without your answer, we just collect the two questions,
okay,
and then you can put your answer in one.
Well,
okay.
Part of my question was already asked by this gentleman, but I still have a second part. How did it feel for you writing a book and publishing it in English while being in exile? Because I assume this is the first book that you're writing while being not in Russia, right?
Excuse me, could you repeat it?
Yeah, how did it feel for you writing and publishing a book in English and being in exile at the same time, like compared to the books that you were writing while being in Russia?
Mm-hmm.
Then the second question, please. We have to wrap it up, I'm afraid.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. I was wondering if you could actually answered the first question about cynicism, about values, about Russians who need to start believing in something in Russian. Because I brought my mom today, who speaks German and Russian. She admires you a lot, and she's very sad that she can't understand anything.
So sweet.
I haven't. Yeah, just but I haven't caught the idea. We can do that after the.
Okay, maybe I think it was
If you need to record it, I can.
Maybe I can just repeat
afterwards.
the two questions. I think
Yeah,
I think I understood. The first question was
remember.
just about the circumstances of what it felt like to write a book in exile, and the second question, if I understood you correctly, is that whether you could elaborate on this, what exactly, which values you were talking about. Is that right? Yeah. For what
I should do that in Russian.
Yes, so because her mum, yeah, so you've got that part, okay. Okay, so, yeah.
Okay.
So the first part of the question in English and then the second part in Russian.
That's not the most difficult experience to write the book and to publish it in English. So a lot of things has happened during the last 2 years, much more shocking than that. And yes, I was, I happen to be very, I was spoiled because I was very popular writer in Russia, and I got used to the fact that everyone was expecting my books to come out, and it was really funny that last year my book All the Kremlin's Men has become again bestseller in Russia right after the beginning of the war. Until the moment it was banned from all the bookstores, but it was really funny that the book published 7 years ago came back to the charts, and in every bookstore was on the bestsellers tables. But then I was declared as foreign agent. My books were banned from all the libraries and disappeared from the bookstores. So it's that's how we live now. We had some plans. We had a country. We believed we were going to live in, and we were planning something to do with that country. And then our plans and hopes and dreams disappeared overnight. So yeah, that was a dramatic change. Nothing wrong with the book in English and German.
Is that for the first question?
Yes.
Yes, okay, because I have a suggestion for the second question, because we're sharp 1 hour has passed already. So maybe if your mother is such a great fan, you can just come up to us after and you can just talk for a couple of minutes. That'd be
was
nice.
my idea.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Mikhail, for coming here. I think it's what. Okay. So I probably don't have to, judging from this reaction, I don't have to recommend you to buy and read the book, but I'm going to do it anyway because I agree that this is a really important conversation we should all join in and have and listen to. So yeah, go and buy and read. So have a good evening.